This is CBN NewsWatch.
And welcome to CBN NewsWatch on this Memorial Day. I'm Ephraim Graham. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to begin this half hour with the White House and congressional Republicans reaching a deal to raise the debt ceiling. It's happening just days before a potential default on government debts. Now some Republicans and Democrats are raising objections. Dale Hurd has more in our top story.
The agreement would increase the nation's $31 trillion debt ceiling another $4 trillion through 2025, but also place some new restraints on federal spending. Both leaders say they made compromises.
The Speaker and I made it clear from the start that the only way forward was a bipartisan agreement.
But Joe Biden later said he made no concessions. Speaker Kevin McCarthy praised the deal, calling it good for the American public.
Doesn't get everything everybody wanted, but that's in divided government. That's where we end up. I think it's a very positive bill.
The budget deal keeps most federal spending roughly flat next year, raising it by 1% in 2025. Defense spending would increase. The agreement includes new work requirements for government aid, with time limits on how long some Americans can receive food assistance. While some Democrats are unhappy with the bill, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries indicated congressional Democrats will support it at the end of the day.
I do expect that there will be Democratic support once we have the ability to actually be fully briefed by the White House.
While McCarthy said that 95% of his fellow GOP members support the deal, an Axios report says as many as 60 House Republicans could vote against it, and some have already slammed the agreement. Representative Ralph Norman of South Carolina called the deal insanity, posting on Twitter, "A $4 trillion debt ceiling increase with virtually no cuts is not what we agreed to. Not going to vote to bankrupt our country. The American people deserve better." Fellow Congressman Bob Good of Virginia also condemned the proposed $4 trillion increase to the debt limit, tweeting, "If that is true, I don't need to hear anything else. No one claiming to be a conservative could justify a yes vote."
I'll debate this bill with anybody, because at the end of the day, is it everything I wanted? No, but we don't control all of it.
McCarthy did claim the deal acts as new money for the IRS.
We repealed every single dollar they were going to use for IRS agents.
The Speaker says lawmakers will have 72 hours to read the text of the bill before an expected vote Wednesday. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer warned colleagues of the potential for Friday and weekend votes in the event of filibusters. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
I want to turn now to the war on Ukraine, where Russia launched its biggest drone attack of the war against Kyiv. 54 Iranian-made drones targeted the city Sunday. Ukrainian defense forces claim they shot down all but one. This comes as Ukraine prepares for a major offensive. Their forces firing artillery at Russian lines to test and demoralize their troops. Friday, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham spoke from Kyiv about the need for the U.S. to step up its support for Ukraine.
We need to be providing F-16s. Not just NATO allies. We should be opening training centers in America, not just Europe. So I appreciate the Biden administration. I've worked with them, but we need to be all in with the goal of allowing Ukraine to evict the Russians.
Senator Graham also said that after the war, Ukraine should be made a member of the European Union and NATO to prevent more military aggression from Russia. As Iran inches closer to red lines drawn both by the U.S. and Israel, experts warn something's got to give. The Islamic Republic further escalating tensions with a new ballistic missile and reports of construction on an underground nuclear facility. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has the latest.
The Khyber missile, named after an ancient Jewish fortress conquered by Muslims, is capable of reaching Israel. Iranian defense officials say it can penetrate enemy air defense systems and evade radar detection. To the west, it's considered a dangerous move that can't be ignored.
Despite the restrictions on Iran's missile-related activities under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, Iran continues to seek a range of missile technologies from foreign suppliers. and to conduct ballistic missile tests in defiance of the resolution.
Meanwhile, Israeli defense forces keep close watch on all areas of Iran's nuclear development. A top general recently stating that Israel could soon be left with no choice other than a preemptive attack.
Iran knows it's playing with fire, and they are getting close to what both Israel and the United States are basically messaging as their red line of where they won't allow Iran's nuclear program to go any further.
In what appears to be an effort to gain the upper hand against the West, Iran is reportedly building a nuclear facility deep underground. While it's unclear whether U.S. bombs could reach it, the Air Force recently posted a picture of this bomb designed for such a purpose, adding it's time to test its performance.
Just how far each weapon goes and just how far into the mountain Iran is digging are going to be closely held secrets by both nations. They don't want to give the other country the upper hand and give them the ability to know whether their strike could work or not.
Gabriel Nerona, former State Department special advisor for Iran, says although diplomacy is not completely off the table, at this point it doesn't seem to be headed anywhere. He says to truly sway Tehran, the Biden administration must threaten consequences the Islamic regime won't risk.
The United States now is starting to get more serious about those messages, and I think that picture of bunker buster bombs is part of that strategy, and we need to see a lot more of that rhetoric and seriousness coming from both the Biden administration as well as Congress.
Nerona says it would be a mistake to underestimate the regime.
The country that chants death to Israel and death to the United States should be taken seriously. I think one of the mistakes that we've made throughout history is not believing dictators when they make a promise in public.
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran is already enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels. But the country has yet to announce that it's built a nuclear weapon. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
We are now just days from the start of hurricane season. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecast a 70% chance of a normal or below normal season. NOAA predicting more than a dozen named storms between June 1st and November 30th, including the possibility of multiple major hurricanes off the Atlantic coast. Warmer than average ocean temperatures and El Nino could make for an unusually active season. President Biden is calling on all Americans to reflect and pray on this Memorial Day. The president proclaiming a day of prayer for permanent peace, calling on all communities to come together at 11 a.m. in their respective locations. He's also asking all Americans to observe a national moment of remembrance at 3 p.m. for those who've sacrificed their lives to protect our nation. Coming up, charges that China is operating as a cartel when it comes to control over the rare earth industry. Find out how this affects our national security and what's being done to fix it. Stay with us. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. The meltdown of the supply chain during the pandemic exposed a serious threat. One of America's greatest adversaries controls the critical elements to key U.S. industries. The solution? Bring the supply chains home. While the cost is high, our national security depends on it. Cost is high. Our national security depends on it. Caitlin Burke returns now to bring us that story.
The elements needed for some of the most commonly used technologies in the world today are relatively abundant in the Earth's crust, including here in the United States. But when it comes to the global supply chain, it's almost entirely controlled by China.
China produces about 65% of global rare earth mining, some 85% of processing, and about 90%, or a little bit above that, of the actual magnets that we use in our devices every day.
As the relationship between Beijing and Washington seems to crumble, demand for tech that relies on rare earth elements is only building.
Rare earth materials are 17 elements on the periodic table, so it's not just one element. And they're used for all sorts of applications across modern life. But what they are really essential for in the context of today's world is they are used to produce the highest strength magnets that power electric motors and generators of all kinds. Everything from electric vehicles to wind turbines to drones robots, and some of the most advanced weapon systems that keep us safe for defense applications.
Relying on the country seen as the greatest threat to both U.S. prosperity and national security is an obvious problem. And experts believe the solution is even more obvious.
We were a leading producer of these before. We can do so again.
Early companies in the United States pioneered some of the most cutting-edge compounds for rare earth magnets. However, like many of the strategic supply chains, we're now so focused on onshoring. Beginning in the 1980s and 90s, we largely offshored this industries because the United States decided to specialize in other areas.
In 2017, owners of MP Materials bought an abandoned mine in the Mojave Desert. Their goal? Use it to create a complete magnetic supply chain. In less than a decade, they've almost accomplished it with the Mountain Pass mine, now the largest rare earth mine in the United States.
Today, we produce around 15% of the global rare earth content. But what we need to bring back to America, and what we are in progress of bringing home, is the ability to refine those materials domestically and then to produce the metals, alloys, and magnets themselves.
Matt Slosher, Senior Vice President of Communications and Policy at MP Materials, says the company is moving full steam ahead on the final steps of this supply chain. The project has the support of both the public and private sectors. Back in 2021, General Motors agreed to buy the magnets produced for use in their electric vehicles. The Department of Defense is also interested, investing $10 million in 2020 and another $35 million in 2022.
In order to create energy security in the United States, we need to have commercial scale champions that can feed into our large manufacturers. And that will provide commercial resiliency, and it will also enable us to ensure that the defense needs are met.
Creating this kind of supply chain here has bipartisan support. Frank Fannin, former Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, says the Trump administration also backed the project.
In the case of MP Materials, we were very supportive of some of their work. You know, they actually had a Chinese investor who had a significant investment, and we worked with MP and were very supportive of their outreach to other investors to effectively dilute the ownership stake of the Chinese interests. So much so that they exited the board.
Fannin sees China essentially operating as a cartel when it comes to its control over the rare earth industry. Case in point, recently moving toward banning exports.
They announced that they intend to restrict the export of rare earth element technology to other countries and restrict other countries to be able to basically compete with them in the rare earth space.
These minerals will also play a significant role in the U.S. clean energy transition. With demand expected to triple over the next decade, Fannin says both the federal government and the corporate sector must stop undermining U.S. strength and security by continuing to turn to China for cheap, clean energy goods.
They're seeking to create and are the dominant supplier to meet the West's environmental objectives. The Chinese have been using our values against us as a weakness. I believe if we mobilize them, it can be a strength in terms of the marketplace.
Fannin says it's imperative the U.S. fully commit now to building the clean, secure, and resilient supply chains needed in the future, a future that must not rely on China. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Still ahead, reorganized religion. For the first time in history, most Americans aren't going to church. Find out how some pastors are coming up with new ways to fill the pews. Most Americans no longer belong to a church. In 2019 alone, 4,500 churches closed. Then COVID compounded the issue. John Jessup reports now on how churches can adapt to reverse this downward trend for future generations.
For 2 weeks, thousands flocked to Asbury University, the Kentucky campus that kicked off a spiritual awakening across the country. That movement also comes during a time of decline for America's churches. Stroll down a busy street in Washington, D.C. like this one with empty storefronts, and there's no denying signs of a slowdown. If it's a struggle for businesses to survive these challenging times, imagine how much harder it is for houses of worship.
People used to go to church because that was the thing you did if you're a good person, and now they don't anymore.
That cultural shift, spurred by changing demographics, reflects a new religious landscape where over the last 20 years, the majority of Americans no longer belong to a church, and weekly attendance dropped from 137 people to just 65 faithful filling the pews. It's a phenomenon journalist Bob Smetana examines in his book, Reorganized Religion, painting a picture of how we arrived here and offering potential paths forward.
Churches were built for a different world than we're in now. And it doesn't mean you have to change your beliefs. It does mean you have to say, okay, how do we adapt in this world?
4,500 churches closed in 2019, the heartbreaking result of fewer people filling the pews. Smetana writes, it can be easy for churches closing their doors to blame themselves when, in reality, a number of factors fuel the trend.
When a church declines, sometimes the people think, this is my fault. If I'd had a better pastor, if we had different music, even if you'd done everything perfectly, this kind of decline would happen because these kind of demographic forces.
COVID only made matters worse, with many congregations still trying to make up for fallen attendance and giving. Studies show church attendance has emotional, relational, and public health benefits. To this veteran religion reporter, church closures reinforce they're not only a loss for people of faith, but society at large.
Churches do a whole lot of great things in the culture, and they do charities, they do disaster relief, and those things will disappear as congregations disappear.
Smetana provides examples of various church bodies making unexpected choices.
And today, I'm excited to announce that Hill City Church and Capital City Christian Church are merging together.
After much prayer, Living Hope Valentine Evergreen is merging with Mosaic to become one Mosaic church.
We thank God for the unity He has created so far, and we're praying that it continues.
A difficult circumstance forcing some congregations to reimagine their call to serve communities in change, and in some cases, taking a step of faith rather than walking away.
Instead of saying you could come join our church, they said, what if we join their church? So they have a continued ministry because this church said there's something bigger than just us and our survival.
Got to remember, the church are the people of God. The buildings are buildings.
When considering an uncertain future, Tennessee pastor Robert Ray says it's important to pray and to be open to God's call.
You got to listen to God in all this. Is this what God is calling you? And look at the reality. I mean, churches close all the time throughout Christian history. I mean, can we find some of the churches, St. Paul founded in Eastern Europe and Rome, and, can you find the exact congregation, that has that linked heritage? And I don't think you can.
Pastor Ray speaks from experience.
The fact is, he had 12 people in that church today.
Jesus had 12 people. He done all right, didn't he?
He leads a congregation that once faced the prospect of closing until a lifeline appeared on their doorstep.
And a bunch of refugees show up. And that group of people showed up, saved that church. It wasn't the future they thought they'd have, but it's a future that was possible because even in difficult times, they kept going.
The story of how refugees from Burma found a home and breathed new life into All Saints Church was portrayed in a 2017 film by the same name.
You do not have an All Saints without faith. You do not have an All Saints without Jesus Christ. Human willing would not have been enough.
The small-town congregation had to adapt, learning each other's customs, culture, and language. More than 15 years later, the doors are still open, now even wider, sharing space with another smaller church.
I'm blessed, because not many congregations our size has this type of demographic.
One idea Smetana weaves throughout the book is the theme of friendship, interconnecting pastors and churches with other congregations and leaders and the communities they serve. He stresses that as churches and people of faith continue in the long and rich history of the Christian church, they should also find ways to minister together here and now to build a brighter future for generations to come. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
A big surprise for some recent college grads, plus your Monday motivation. It's all coming up next, right here on CBN NewsWatch. Stay with us. Diplomas are usually the most prized paper possession at graduation, but that may be a close second for college grads at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. During last week's commencement, each graduate received $1,000 in cash, but the money also came with a challenge. Keynote speaker, billionaire Robert Hale asked the students to think beyond themselves.
First 500 is for you. It's a celebration of all you have done to be here today. Your leaders. Celebrate. The second 500 is a gift for you to give to somebody or somebody else or another organization who could use it more than you.
In case you're counting, I'll do the math. Hale's gift adds up to roughly $2.5 million, reminding students it is better to give than it is to receive. Time now for your Monday motivation, and today I want to leave you with this thought as we chart a new week together. You are a masterpiece. God created you for greatness. This is not the time to shrink, settle, or play small. Your Creator is King of all. Walk in the authority He sacrificed His only Son to give you. With that word, make this a memorable and marvelous Monday. Well, that is a wrap for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time. You can also find them online. Of course, that address is cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us. That address is right there at the bottom of your screen. It's newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. Make it a marvelous Monday. I look forward to seeing you right back here, same time tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.